So let's talk about dysgraphia. There's a whole bunch of DYS disorders, if I can put it that way. And dysgraphia is one of them. Dyslexia is another one. If you had an issue that was related to those in math, it would be called dyscalculia. And not a ton of children who are dyslexic have issues with dyscalculia. But what is really common is that children with dyslexia have trouble memorizing their math facts. They may be very good at math, but they have trouble memorizing their math facts. So that's one of the things that is like a little heads up around dyslexia. But we see it with in dyscalculia show up. We do see dyscalculia show up with a few children who are dyslexic. More commonly, we see children struggle with their handwriting. Now, whether it's true dysgraphia and somebody, if they took them to a neuropsych and they got an eval, would they be dysgraphic? Maybe. My son wouldn't even touch a writing instrument until he was 5 years old. And we were at a restaurant and there was another 5-year-old girl coloring the picture at the table. And he picked up the crayons and colored. And literally it was the first time he had ever picked up anything in his hand and done anything with it. He just refused. He wouldn't ever do it. Painting, finger paint. You can imagine the millions of different ways I tried to get this child engaged in working with an implement in his hand. Wasn't having it. Really struggled with dysgraphia, but I had remediated unintentionally his dyslexia by doing a lot of work with him when he was starting at 18 months old, focusing on pictures and their sounds, the sound that they started with. So when you think about it, writing is not a natural skill. It's a human invention. Guess what else is not a natural skill? Reading. Reading isn't a natural skill. Neither is writing. Humans didn't do this thing called reading and writing forever, really. I mean, we go back to what is the beginning of what we understand writing to be, and we're looking at cave drawings, right? Artwork that they created. But attaching sounds to symbols, that's a fairly new human intervention. If you're very interested in dysgraphia, look up dysgraphia.life. And you can Google dysgraphia. There's several really good websites on dysgraphia. So does this child need, the first thing that you're going to ask when you're thinking about a child who's not diagnosed with dysgraphia, and let me tell you, very few children you're going to come across are ever diagnosed with dysgraphia. And regardless of whether you're working with a 5-year-old or a 15-year-old, that what you're really asking yourself is this one question: does this child need systematic, explicit instruction in handwriting and spelling? Do they need that? And people think of dysgraphia as a handwriting issue. Part of dysgraphia can just be a spelling issue. Spelling is also an issue that falls under dyslexia. Where that line is doesn't seem to be very clear. But the real question around dysgraphia that we're going to address today is around handwriting. You're going to notice it with children that have handwriting that's not just messy, but messy in particular ways. But either way, really direct, explicit instruction helps. Dysgraphia is present in 7 to 15% of school-aged children. Do you remember how many children are dyslexic? What percentage? Minimum 10, maximum 20, depending on who's doing the analyzing. So a similar amount doesn't always mean there's a one-to-one correspondence. Lots of dyslexic children I work with don't have any issues with dysgraphia. Dysgraphia is more common in boys than girls, so is dyslexia. A person may have dysgraphia alone, or they may have it with dyslexia. And remember that dyslexia also has a pretty high comorbidity with ADD or ADHD. I know there's only one of those that's correct at the moment, but I forget which one. What are the characteristics of dysgraphia? Dysgraphia is a learning disability that affects a child's writing abilities. And what we're going to look for are these things. Here's what you need to know. Legibility, duh. That seems pretty straightforward, doesn't it? But we're also going to look at the letter sizes and the shapes that they're using. The other piece is spacing. Spacing between individual letters and words, and then the spacing between words themselves. Children with dysgraphia have weird ways that they do their spacing. I should not use the word weird, that they don't space in a way that's typical. And they also use capitalization randomly. They'll randomly capitalize letters in the middle of words. And sometimes they have reversals. sometimes, but we're not going to get too up in arms around reversals for either dyslexia or dysgraphia. But the big one that you see is refusal to write. They don't want to write. They resist writing. They say they don't like it. It hurts their hand. They fatigue really quickly. And some children have problems with poor spelling. Even if they don't have a reading issue at all, they might be a poor speller. Now, children may have difficulty putting their thoughts on paper, like sequencing their ideas, even though they can express themselves verbally very well. So when we think about a child who's dysgraphic, they may be a child who's reading just fine and who's able to tell a story or retell a story, can come up with what they want to say for their research paper, but when they go to write it, it's a problem for them. They will write more simply because of it. And remember that writing requires a complex set of motor and information processing skills. So those of you who are just in the kindergarten training, we were talking about how you build at the single word level. That's the beginning of writing. And we can dictate words for children to build like phrases. They can build tan van with their word tiles. They can build whole sentences with their word tiles before they ever do any writing, or that they're building their writing skills alongside them building their words. Here's the thing with dysgraphia. If the kids refuse to write, they sometimes miss all of that work, where the children who are writing are thinking of words, thinking of their sounds, and then doing their best to write them, even if they're using inventive spelling, right? And if a child's dysgraphic, they miss doing all of that. This is what it looks like. So this is two second grade writing samples. So let's look at those. What are the differences that you notice about those two second grade samples? One of these boys is dysgraphic, and one of these kids is dyslexic. What do you notice? We were in a room, I tell you to turn to your partner and show her what you notice. You can drop it in the chat, what you notice. So we were talking about what we're going to be looking at is one of the things we're looking at is spacing. Do you see issues with spacing with the one on the left versus the one on the right? And then one of the other things was inappropriate use of capitalization. Now, the one on the left, did he use capitalization appropriately? Did pretty well. Of course, this is his final draft at the end of second grade. This is my child. End of second grade, his final draft. Final draft. With a teacher who was very on him about his handwriting all year long. And one of the other things you'll notice is the space, when we're looking at the spacing in his writing, is that there's a lot of space like in between the letters and the words. So if you look at the word like breakfast, 3 or 4 lines down, you see all the space between the letters. But then if you look at space between the words, sometimes there's almost no space between the words. That the words themselves can be really spread apart, but then having appropriate spacing between the words isn't there. Do you see that? And then the other thing is, like, if you look, he says where he's written Dusty, and he uses a capital S in the middle of Dusty. Maybe he didn't even know he was, but he's not, but the word above it, as, he's using a lowercase s. So that inability around sizing, that the appropriate size of the word, of the letters is not there either. And because this is his final draft, there's not as many examples of that. But with other children who are dysgraphic, the letters will be all different sizes. This idea about what lives in the basement and what lives in the attic of letters doesn't work. But the kid on the right, he did a pretty good job, right? He's got appropriately sized letters. He's got the right spacing between his letters, the right spacing between the words. And his sentence jumped on the backs. I don't know what the beginning of that sentence was, but can you see where his issues are? His ability to be able to attach words to sounds is not there, but his handwriting is pretty good. So it's not just messy handwriting. It's the issues with the spacing. It's the issues with inappropriate use of capitals. It's the issues with the sizes of the words, the letters. And then here's another two examples of a 7-year-old on the left and an 8-year-old on the right, both of whom's parents have given me permission to use their work. And the boy on the left has pretty significant dyslexia, but he doesn't have issues really too much with the dysgraphia. I didn't work with him very long, but he chose to write his alphabet all in capitals. He was at 7. That was what he had been practicing at school, so that's what he did. But you can see him writing his name, how careful and neat his print is, the appropriate spacing inside of the word, between the words. And then look over at little Liam. This is little Liam at 8 years old, and he wrote for me the words that he knew how to spell. He started to write the alphabet. You see how far he got? He was better at math, so he wrote the numbers. Do you see the spacing issues in the numbers? So these are the children's about when I met with them and I was getting a writing sample from them as part of their screening. This is what I asked for. I asked them to write their name. I asked them to write the alphabet. Liam couldn't write the alphabet, so I said, can you write some numbers for me? And by looking at his numbers, I can see that kid's got issues with spacing all day long. In fact, he doesn't even understand what the lines on the paper are for. And guess what? That continued for years. Trying to get him to write inside of lines was like pulling teeth. Right? So all of those, not only was he significantly dyslexic, he also had pretty significant dysgraphia, but really bright, capable, angry child because he was aware how things weren't working out for him as well as they were for other children. All right, here's another writing sample. We're looking at all these because I think the hardest part about doing this work sometimes is knowing what you're looking at, how to evaluate it. So on the left is a 10-year-old and on the right is a 13-year-old. What do you notice? Let's look and see. What do you notice about the one on the left? Drop it in the chat. What do you notice about spacing? What are you thinking about in terms of capitalization or the word size, the letter sizes in comparison to one another? I can look down not just in the sentences, but in the words that I've dictated at the bottom. And to me, the spacing looks really pretty good. I don't see any big issues with spacing. It looks like his letter formation is pretty on track. The size of his letters seems to be relative to one another, seems pretty good. This is just a child who's pretty severely dyslexic. So guess how much writing he's done? Very little. So these dyslexic children who've done very little writing, sometimes their handwriting is not very well developed. And then once they start writing, their handwriting develops really quickly. That it's not really that they're dysgraphic, that there's a neurological issue. The issue is that they just haven't done it enough. So you have to be careful as a tutor and a teacher when you're looking at a child that when you see it, you don't automatically assume, well, they must be dysgraphic or they must be dyslexic. That the key question to answer is, what kind of instruction have they had? And have they had opportunities to develop the skills? So for dyslexic children, they don't write because they can't spell and they hate it. So they often don't develop their handwriting skills as a result of it. And once they are able to read and write and understand that sounds attached to letters and that they can think of a word and even multi-syllable words and get really close to spelling them, they can spell, their handwriting improves as they practice actually writing. That's what happens with the boy. That's what's happened with the boy that I've worked with the last year and a half. When he came to me, his handwriting was, you couldn't even hardly read what he wrote. But as he developed his reading and spelling skills, he started writing more. And now his handwriting is still kind of a messy middle school boy handwriting, but so much more legible. The boy on the right, who's 13, pretty severely dyslexic. His instruction is at school, at home, was super hit or miss as far as I could tell. And when I first looked at his handwriting, I thought, this is probably a child who's just written very, very little, given how low he was for both reading and spelling. But I'm looking at his letters, the alphabet that he wrote across, and I'm thinking that he has pretty good control of his pencil. He's able to get the letter shapes to be really legible, pretty legible. I wouldn't say either one of these children really have an issue with dysgraphia. So how do you strengthen the muscles in younger children to help them to develop that pencil grip so that they are able to control the writing instrument? And there are a lot of different ways that you can do that. And it doesn't have to be just for 4 and 5 and 6-year-olds. If you have an older child who has a weak pencil grip, which is the 3 fingers that grab the writing instrument, that you can do these things with them as well. Cooking is a great way to develop those muscles in the hands and the fingers. That sewing requires really close attention to detail and requires you to use the muscles. Making anything out of clay or Play-Doh, using rubber bands on a geoboard, building with Legos, any kind of jewelry making that you do with beads, and coloring and painting and drawing, using all of those kind of more gross motor skills. I have some kiddos who are excellent at drawing using like chalk and wall pastels. But once you start to try to put a pencil in their hand, or colored pencils, or any kind of what you might consider a more fine motor drawing instrument, they're like, no way. So that's something to notice. The other thing about dysgraphic children is often their scissor skills can be poor. So having them cut with scissors is a great way to develop the muscles in the hands. And doing dot to dots and mazes helps them to develop that fine motor control without actually writing letters, right? In a dot to dot and working in mazes. So when you're writing letters with the children, when you're working on letter formation, or you're just practicing writing the letters and saying the sounds. So think about the sound dictation portion of our lesson. That you can do that by having them jump up. If you've got a small chalkboard, they can, or a lap chalkboard, having them write on a chalkboard, holding a piece of chalk while you're doing sound dictation really works the muscles, especially fat sidewalk chalk. Really develops the muscles in the hands. I'll have children tell me, oh, my hand is tired after we work at the chalkboard for a few minutes. Working in a salt tray is a gross motor, and that helps them to practice making those letter shapes and attaching the sounds to them. So that's not so much for developing the pencil grip, but both of these are helping the child to practice making the correct letter shape while they attach the sound to it. So when we're looking at children's handwriting, we're seeing that they're using a funky way of making a letter shape. The older they are, the harder it is to remediate because they've already done it wrong a gajillion times. The younger they are, the easier it is to do. And if you'll follow like the handwriting without tears sequence, if you just want to work on handwriting with the children, that's okay. So if you have a dysgraphic child, following that handwriting without tears sequence is a great way to support them. But you still want to bring their work out of pencil and paper and back to gross motor. Do not try to remediate a dysgraphic child using pencil and paper or felt tip pen and paper or marker and paper. They need to come out of fine motor and start over, basically, with gross motor handwriting. So all of the things I have listed there are different ways that you can do the gross motor. The easiest, in my estimation, is a lap board. A whiteboard, I don't mind, but there's very little resistance in a whiteboard, which is why it makes it so easy for kids to use it and why they like it. But the chalk on a lap chalkboard requires much more in terms of hand control and arm control. So you might think about getting a lap board chalkboard. Also, nobody uses chalkboards anymore, so kids think they're super cool, right? It's new. For us, it's like old school, but for them, it's new. And Montessori websites sell primary concepts. Montessori services, they sell those chalkboards that are lap board size. And then, of course, the shaving cream that's an at-home thing. And some people don't use shaving cream anymore because it's toxic. So when you're writing with the children who are dysgraphic, you're going to model how to write the letter by slowly drawing the letter and then saying the letter sound before you pick up your finger or your chalk or your marker. And then you can underline the letter saying the letter sound again. This is not any different than what we've done before with letter writing, but I'll show it to you again. And for a dysgraphic child, you know, the deal is with dysgraphic children, think about dyslexic children where like, oh, you know, regular children can learn something around reading with 1, 2, 3, 4 repetitions. A dyslexic child might need 15 or 50 or 150. It's the same with dysgraphia. So when you have a way for the child to be able to practice it that's inviting, like a chalkboard or a salt tray, it encourages them to do more repetitions. Could they do this with a stick in the dirt and still train their brain how to do it? Absolutely. There's no magic in salt and there's no magic in chalkboards, except that they provide an avenue for the child to do this gross motor work that's inviting. So when you're working with a letter with a child who's dysgraphic, often they might, like the boy I'm working with, he always made his A's like this, right? That was how he made his A since he was little. So now his A's look like this. He'll write a word and his A will just be like some kind of random squiggle on the page. And I worked with him on making his A circle and down, and he can do it. But when he's writing quickly, he'll go right back to making his A like this. He's 12. I started working with him when he was 11. So addressing this with a younger child is so much easier. Sometimes with older children, you'll never really be able to remediate it, but they can do it when they want to. And that's helpful to them so that if they're writing a note to a boss, they can write an A that looks like an A. If anybody ever writes in the future, we don't know. But for when you're writing with the child, you want to give a starting place and go very slowly. So slowly. And when there's a transition, stop. Ah. You could underline it and say ah, but if I'm teaching letter shape, I'm not going to do that. Watch me. Ah. Now I can turn it over to the child and give them the starting point. And still some children will go, if that's what they're used to. Like they didn't catch what you were doing. So then you take a turn again. Circle, down. Ah. Your turn. And one of the ways you can help them is to give them their starting. I give them a circle and a little line. Start here. And I'll give them the first direction. Circle and down. Often I will use that language. Circle up and down. Circle down. Right, if they're working on a G. Notice it's the same words, but when they're practicing making that shape, they just need a cue about I'm here where I stopped and now I'm going to go down. So with the child on their own, the thing I like about a salt tray is that I've made the shape. I can shake it out, but look, what do you see that's still there? The shape. But for a child who's dysgraphic, they need their starting point. And sometimes they need a little reminder about which direction they go in. So if I give it to them like this and I give them a starting point and they go like this, because that's how they normally do it, I'll give them a starting point and a direction. And then circle and down. And then they say the G sound. I don't know if I said G or G, but I did. But say the sound when you write the letter. Now you can fill up your whole salt tray where we do circle and down. And sometimes I'll do like this. I'll put my dots on the tray and they'll do circle and down, circle and down, circle and down. And if they don't say the ah, we're going to go back and do it again and say the ah, 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 ah. And you'll be surprised that after they do this 4, 6, 10 times in a row at one time, and I'll say, how many ahs do you think you can make in their board? They'll do ah, 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 whatever it is, doesn't matter. Stand up at the chalkboard and see how many you can make. Go to the whiteboard. Can you make more ahs on the whiteboard? Oh, here's my big piece of white paper and my marker. Do you want to, or my whiteboard and my marker? Do you want to, let's make some more ahs. I wonder how many more you can make. So that they're writing 25 times if you can get them to. Over and over, writing it and saying the sound. So the first step is just the functional piece of circling down if they need it. And then attaching that to the sound is where you're going. Okay. Okay. Any questions about that before I go on to the next thing? We stop there at 10:35. I haven't taken any questions. Anybody got any questions about this piece?
I have a comment.
Okay, go ahead.
I found that when I go circle and down and I get to the bottom, and if I hold my finger there and say the sound, it really makes a difference.
We're going to do circle and down. Ah.
Yes.
Is that what you mean? Mm-hmm.
Yes.
So that we make the shape, we give them whatever support they need, like down, up, and around. B. Okay, your turn. Give them a starting point. Down. I'm vocalizing for them while they're concentrating. Up and around. Say it with me. B. That's what I do. Do it again. And I'm vocalizing down, up, and around. B. Let's say it. B. Right? So that I'm encouraging the child to say it with me so that when they're writing it, I'm giving them the vocal directions of what to do. And then when they stop, then we do the B. And then hopefully pretty quickly, they get the down, up, and around B themselves. That's the goal. That's where you're headed, for them to go B, right? And then do it again. B. Let's shake it out. Try it again. B. Write it again. B. And then they'll do this. If they're used to doing this, they'll make it again the wrong way. Trust me, they will. They'll be right back to whatever way they've made it before as soon as you shake it out and they've forgotten what it is they're supposed to do. And then you can give them their starting point again. Here we go again. Down, up, and around. And if you need to make it again first to model it, make it again to model it. You keep modeling it down, up, and around. And then shake it out. And in the salt tray, there's still the impression there. Give them their starting point, down, up, and around. This is the root. This is the meat of how to support children who struggle with handwriting, regardless of their age. It always works the same way. Okay. There's not like some big magic thing that you do to help children develop their handwriting who are struggling with dysgraphia. Okay. So then I showed you the first step. Then the second step is where the child takes the turn, and we went through that. And then all the pieces that I've shown you in the salt tray are the ones that you're going to use, where you give them a starting point. You provide a little directionality for them. And then you ask them to take turns, and you keep modeling. So you could take a screenshot of that page for your own notes. The one piece I didn't probably show you that's on there is how you model when the child is having trouble in one particular spot. We can draw their attention to it. So like I have a boy who makes K like this, and he goes like this. That's how he makes K. He draws a line, then he flicks to the side. And he'll do it with his his marker, whatever he's writing with. He draws a line, and then he just makes 2 flicks off of his line. So we worked on K, right? So here's K, down. And he'll practice it, and then he'll go right back to doing flick, flick. So I'll take a turn, and I'll say, watch. And I'll put my finger here and stop. Now you do it. So I bring his attention right back to the piece I want him to focus on. And wherever my transition is, I stop and I move very slowly, and I am modeling intense concentration on this piece. Notice that I didn't go, look, you need to start right here and then come in and touch the line and then go back down and draw the line so it touches the bottom so that these two are at the same place. I did not do that. I'm not going to give him a bunch of verbal directions. If verbal directions worked, he already would know how to make his K, because people have already given him verbal directions. He needs to bring his attention to starting here, and that we go in and out. And I might give him the direction of in and out, if that's going to be my cue for him. In, out. Okay, so bringing their child's attention to the one place that they are need help with, which might just be their starting point, right? If they're making a guff like this, watch, circle, down, G. Okay.
Kristen, I do have a quick question.
Yep, go for it.
So my little guy that I've been working with, the 7-year-old that I, continuously talk about every so often with you guys, he has improved his orthography, his letter formation, but I'm trying to find what is the proper paper that I can use so that he can focus on, okay, the low letters go on this side, the tall letters go here, and the low letters go here. I just reveal like one line at a time. Mm-hmm. And I'm trying to teach him that the low letters like A, N go on the yellow line, and then the mm-hmm. letters like G that go to the basement or whatever you call it.
I think that's fine. So, the process here is to go from gross motor to bring them into, there you are, to bring them into being able to write smaller and to be able to write on paper and to know how those letters fit, what goes in the attic, what goes in the basement, or what goes above and what goes below. So that's a process, right? But when we're working with dysgraphic children, often what we do is just do more pencil paper work. And that's the part that doesn't work, is to do more pencil paper. So I'm spending a lot of time showing all this gross motor work.
Yeah, I like it. We're getting there. All right. Thank you.
Okay. You're getting there. That's exactly how it feels. One little piece at a time. So, I was going to make a pitch here for teaching cursive, that when you work with cursive with children, that if you have a child that you think is dysgraphic, that one of the things that you can do is have them work on learning how to write in cursive. For some children who are particularly older, who are really hate writing, they hate printing, they don't want to write, that learning how to write in cursive is like a whole new world for them. It's a whole new skill set. It addresses all the issues related to the dysgraphia, the spacing between letters, the spacing between words, the size of the individual letters in relationship to one another, all get addressed in cursive. The issue is that a lot of kids want to be able to print, but I've taught multiple children how to write in cursive, and they enjoy writing in cursive and find that it's very pleasurable. There's also a lot of good brain research around the right brain, left brain integration of writing in cursive, and there's probably more value around writing in cursive than we even are aware of. So all of those pieces are supported that are here on the page. We're talking about doing a lot of work. All of our work is geared towards doing that sound symbol connection, that orthographic mapping piece. And when you write in cursive, that the brain sees the word as one chunk, it really helps to marry that sound symbol connection. And because it's one continuous fluid movement, what they're thinking is that the brain then internalizes that as one piece. So something to consider around the teaching the children the benefits of writing in cursive. Now, of course, while the child is developing their writing skills, we want to provide them with accommodations because we want them to still to be able to write. So you can often, one of the accommodations given to kids is that adults will act as a scribe. And so that the adult will write down what it is the child is saying. There are now other, I just had a mother sharing with me and asking me about different apps that are voice to text apps, and I am not familiar with those. If you are, go ahead and drop them in the chat. But a way for a child to be able to dictate what it is they want to say and have it magically show up on the computer. Now, I will tell you that what we have often done that I really prefer is to teach a child who's 9, 10 years old to start doing keyboarding. We have a whole keyboarding program that that Elaine kind of invented. And that we've tested out multiple times with great success. But it's not something that we're going to teach you today to use, but you can encourage parents to get their children to learn how to keyboard so that they can type what it is that they need to write. So like Matthew, if he has to write, he's being forced to write every day at school. So his handwriting is improving, his stamina is improving, the length of what he's writing is improving, but still given a choice, he will do everything in print. He will he composes on the computer. And I think that's, a reasonable way for children to be able to write what it is they want to say, but they still need to be able to handwrite well enough so that they have to handwrite a note, they can do that. And then another accommodation is for math, for them to use graph paper. So you can get graph paper that has 1 centimeter squares on it. That's big enough to put a number in each square. Montessori websites sell this 1 centimeter square graph paper, and it helps the child who's dysgraphic to keep their work organized, to keep the columns organized for their work. That's an issue for children who are dysgraphic, keeping the columns neat so they know which numbers are in which columns. So you've seen pictures of Lydia learning how to write in cursive. Cursive is a way to get her to be able to develop her handwriting, but also to develop her pencil grip, which has improved her print handwriting as well. Cursive on a chalkboard was her preferred activity, and so we did a lot of that. And she doesn't write in cursive regularly, but she can write in cursive, which she thinks is kind of cool because nobody that she knows can write in cursive. So it becomes her special skill,
so Lydia,
her little superpower.
She made rainbow letters. Do you want to show them what you did? Okay.
This.
Mm-hmm.
Hand.
You want to show them this?
Yeah. And this is the stressor cat, and that's Sid.
Muy importante. Say adios.
Adios.
Okay, so how many times do you think she wrote that? Probably a good 6, 8, 10 times. So we're talking about repetition. Remember that she's one of those kids that needs tons of repetition. Rainbow letters, cursive rainbow letters is a way to get all that repetition, whether it's cursive or print. She's doing at cat. Of course, that's her favorite word, so we did that one first that day. But think of cursive as a way to entice a child who hates print to write and write sequences of letters that they attach the sounds to, right? Which is the orthographic mapping process. And then read the word, underlining it, saying the word. So the goal is to get her to, we're basically doing reading through spelling, right? And that is perfectly acceptable to do that. Her child is learning to read and write all at the same time. But for some children who are dysgraphic, their reading skills far exceed their writing skills. So we're teaching all of these individual letter formations that we hope that the child is transferring into the writing that they are doing, right? But if you're working with a child like Nora is, where you are raising their skill levels somewhat simultaneously, and that they really didn't write before, and you're like, okay, and now they're writing in a gross motor way, or for a young child who's writing in a gross motor way, how do I make that bridge from writing gross motor to writing on lined paper? And one of the bridges that you can use is to have the child write gross motor in multiple different formats. And then you can have the child write on blank paper with a writing instrument. So whether that's a marker or whether it's a fine felt tip pen, whatever it is that you prefer, but they can write their words on blank paper. Why? Because there's no lines. Lines tell us good and bad, right and wrong. If the child isn't really ready to start focusing on what lives in the attic and what lives in the basement, when you just let them practice making the shapes first on paper, whatever size they make, they are now taking what they learned gross motor and now doing fine motor with it, but without the complication of there being lines. Do you get that? So you might think, oh, but it's not neat, and how do they know? And it's cockeyed. That's okay, because they are transferring what they learned from the salt tray into how do I do this with this new writing instrument using a proper pincer grip on blank paper, and learning how to make those shapes, not with gross motor, but with fine motor, which just means using the hand, using their pincer grip. That's enough new difficulty. And then you can introduce this idea of that it sits in line, that the words sit in the lines. Now, do you have to sit in blank paper for weeks and months and years? No, but give them the opportunity to practice writing freely without the added complication of the lines. So we're focusing on the piece that is important, which is, can I make the shape, the proper shape, with this new writing instrument? And then we're going to say, can I make the proper shape with this new writing instrument and have it sit in the line spacing? Does that make sense? Questions, comments, thoughts?